Welcome to High Tech in the Heartland. I'm Bob Goff, and I'm with Scott Richardson, and we are going to talk about some more interesting subjects that pertain to Quincy and the Midwest in terms of technology. But Scott wants to chat a little bit about his disclaimers and some other things first.
Well, first,
and qualifications, I should say.
Maybe just disclaimer first, Bob. But I'm a patent attorney here in Quincy, and as an attorney, I may mention some legal things. And I want people to know that there's no client-attorney relationship formed by me talking about these things. And also, I'm not giving any legal advice. For me to give legal advice for somebody, they would have to be my client, and I would have to know their specific situation. And then finally, I work for Robinson Cole, an East Coast law firm, and I'm not representing Robinson Cole. I'm just talking as a private citizen who's interested in high tech in the heartland, Bob.
And today's topic is satellites.
Satellites, and then we're going to talk about a little bit of it's an unrelated technology that's taken over a lot of the duties of satellites. And first I was going to mention that I actually have a little bit of a background in satellites. I don't claim to be an expert on them, but I spent a year selling satellites. And when I say selling satellites, I wasn't selling the dishes on the ground. I was actually part of the team that sold communication satellites. I worked for Hughes Aircraft.
So you were actually selling the satellites themselves.
I was, yeah, and I was on, at that time Hughes had two lines of satellite. They had the old spinner technology, HS-376s. I was the new guy, so that was my line. And then they had the brand new body stabilized ones, the ones that have the wings. The wings are actually solar arrays.
Right.
And the body stabilized HS-601s, and that went to another guy. But there were two business managers, and so one of the two of us was on every single program that we bid. And I think I worked on about 19 programs. I think Hughes sold about between 50 and 60 HS-376s, that I worked on like 19 of them. Wow. But anyway, and actually the HS-376s, we sold the first communications satellite sold to communist China. I take that back. It wasn't sold to communist China. It was sold to a consortium of investors that launched it over China and broadcast into China.
Okay.
Called AppStar.
Okay.
And then many years later, my beautiful wife, when I met her, she was a news reporter for a satellite news agency broadcasting. She's from China. It was broadcast into China. And she was broadcast on my satellite, my AppStar satellite.
Was that the line you used, the pickup line you used to get her aboard?
No, I didn't realize that till a couple of years later. It's like, you're broadcast on, and she didn't think it was that big a deal. I thought it was kind of cool, though. Now, I sold the satellite that she was broadcast on.
When I was in television back in the late 80s, and I would have to do live shots with KOMU TV in Columbia, and we would take our satellite truck out. And we would go to one time when Jefferson City played Hannibal in a high school football game. And I was based out of Columbia, but I got to come back and go to Hannibal for the game. And I did a pregame interview with the coach that, of course, we had to buy satellite time for. And then I would, if I was covering on the Missouri Tigers when they were playing somewhere in the Big Eight, I would have to go do those games. And then our satellite truck would go, and we'd have to, buy the satellite time and hit the window and make sure, okay, your sports hit has got to be between 6:13 and 6:19 because you could only buy like these 5-6 minute windows.
Yeah.
So I remember having to do all that, and boy, if you missed your window, because back then you had to buy. I mean, you buying that time.
You spent the money regardless of whether you broadcast or not.
A couple $100 or whatever. Yeah. So, or you could ask for an extension, and but yeah, I remember all that rigmarole. Now TV reporters and anybody else basically just take your phone and you hit a couple buttons on your app and say, "Hi, I'm standing here in front of this fire that's da-da-da." You don't have to mess with satellite trucks or anything now.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, satellites, that time was incredibly valuable because back then, I don't know how many they have now, but back then they only had a couple of hundred geosynchronous, communication satellites around the Earth. By the way, do you know how a geosynchronous satellite works? And this is kind of cool, but if you send something into orbit and it goes and it stays stable, it's not going away from the Earth or coming around the Earth. It has to go at a certain speed, right? Uh-huh. And the closer it is to Earth, the faster that speed. It's really going around fast. Like the LEOs, the low Earth orbiting satellites, they might go around every 10 hours or 5 hours or something.
Around the
world. Yeah, around the world. And they can go any direction too. They can go around the poles. They can go around the equator, any direction. And then also that's a round orbit. They don't have to be round. They can be highly elliptical. They can go way out in space, then come down and then zoom right next to the Earth's surface and then go way out in space like that. But anyway, the round orbits, as you get further out, the orbit or the the time of rotating the Earth becomes less and less, or becomes a greater time. For example, it might take 5 hours if you're low and 7 hours. And if you get to the point where you're 24 hours and you're above the equator, you look up and that satellite goes around at the same rate that the Earth rotates, so it appears to be stationary.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, and you talk about there being the hundreds up there or what have you, and again, I think the one thing to note is they all don't go in the same pattern, and there are multiple patterns, and there are multiple, just because like you said, the equator, the poles, whatever, they can do that.
Yeah, and there were a couple hundred geosynchronous communication satellites. There are like 5,000 satellites now.
Right.
But and also just for trivia, the difference between a geosynchronous orbit and a geostationary satellite is the station keeping, because the Earth is not a perfect sphere.
Right.
And because of influences of the moon and because it's not a perfect sphere, these satellites get a little bit out of position, and so they have little jets on them that they have to adjust them, and they'll move them, and so that's called station keeping. That's geostationary.
And but yeah, like you said, some of them do just stay there, right?
Yeah,
in the one fixed position.
The communication ones do, and they appear from they appear in the same spot. They go around at the same rate as the Earth. So when you're looking at them, it looks like they're just stationary. Okay. So, and then the vast majority of them are either LEOs or MEOs, mid-Earth orbiting satellites, like the geosynchronous satellites and stuff. They don't stay in a fixed position. They're going around. They're like 31 of them, I think, or 28 of them, something like that.
And we're 22,000 miles up or something like that?
22,000 miles is a geosynchronous orbit.
Okay.
And anything higher than that is it's going to go slower than the Earth's rotation, and anything lower than that is going to go faster than the Earth's rotation. So.
Okay.
But, and also I wanted to talk about, a newer technology has come along, and it's newer, but it's older than satellites, and that's drones. Drones have taken over a lot of the duties of satellites. Like a couple of the main duties are, communications, for example, cell phone signals or broadcast, television signals or even radio signals. And then also remote sensing, spy sats. And then also remote sensing for crop estimates, for example. There's a company here in town that used to do crop estimates. They take satellite data from different countries around the world, and they would make crop estimates based on that. But anyway, drones can do a lot of those functions. Drones are lower than satellites. They don't go all the way out, but like a drone that you could buy this afternoon from Amazon, you can get up about 500 or 600 feet, or you could probably get higher than that if you wanted. But they depend on battery and the quality of the engine and everything. But anyway, some of the military drones, they can get up to 10 miles high. And the military uses those in lieu of spy satellites because it costs, even though those drones are very expensive, they cost a fraction of what a satellite. I mean, a small fraction. And they're more or less expendable. You shoot down a $50,000 drone, just put up another one, or maybe they might be more like 100 or 200,000, but it's not like a $50 million satellite.
And also in going back to the television analogy, back when you used to go and have to buy the satellite time if you wanted to do anything where you didn't have a microwave truck that could get your signal back and you had to go that 30, 60, 70 miles out for a story or whatever. Now, with the internet, you can just get online, and you can do it that way and not have to mess with a satellite.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
So I would think, does that mean satellite demand has diminished over the years?
Well, it's actually increased. Like I said, there are 5,000 satellites. Actually, there are like 11,000 satellites up, but a bunch of them are zombie satellites that are either dead, not dead in the water, but dead in space,
there, yeah.
Or they're
and they come back to Earth eventually, right?
Yeah, well, not necessarily. It depends on the orbit.
Okay.
It depends, if they're low enough, they do. But if they're high enough, they just keep going around. And also the United States and probably other countries too. We track everything that's out in orbit, every nut that's come off a satellite. We track everything, and they want to know where those things are so that if somebody does launch something and it's hostile towards us, they can recognize that versus some dead satellite from like 1997 that's up there.
Sure, yeah, because if you're going to send, if SpaceX or whatever is going to head up into space or NASA, then you go up there, and you don't want to run into something. And
bad. Also time is of the essence. When they do detect something, they're only going to have just a few minutes to respond, so every second is crucial. So that's why they track everything up there. But let's see, I mentioned the huge geosynchronous satellites and drones, and I don't know, it seems like we have so many uses for satellites that the GPS is probably the use that we use every single day, almost probably multiple times per day. In fact, I think that's one of the best investments the United States has ever made into technology was putting up GPS. And I did a study on GPS early on in my career, and I remember reading, the technical description of how it worked, and I'm thinking, this wouldn't work. There's no way that this would work. And it's like, but I knew it worked because it was already, when I did the study, it was like an overview to brief some military folks. It was already up and launched, and they didn't have a full complement of satellites, but it was working then. So, but
you look at that, and again, the technology is amazing because back when I remember back when satellite television was first a thing, and we all had those big moon-shaped dishes in our yards. My grandma had like one of the first ones, and then my other grandparents, actually, their property in New London, Missouri, is where the cable company set up operations. So they had their little cable in their backyard, about a half mile behind their house. They had this big antenna, they had the satellite dish, they had the receiving area, all that. So whatever cable company they had came in there and did that. And that was my first exposure to it. And then I had a friend of mine, her dad sold the satellite dishes.
Yep.
And that was it was a big deal in the 80s.
That was a hot business for a short period.
Oh yeah, probably 5-6 years in the 80s, I guess. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, that's when DirecTV came in and a dish, and like, hey, we can put this little bitty dish in your house, on your roof or in your yard, and you don't have to have this big ugly thing.
Now, how big was the dish in your grandmother's yard? It was probably about like the size of this table or something.
It was huge. It was bigger than that. It was huge. It was like it was massive. It was bigger than my. I'm not the tallest guy in the world, but my wingspan. It was bigger than Ron Kinder's wingspan.
And when I was a kid in high school, the dishes were like 3 or 4 feet in. And then, like you say, when DirecTV came along, they put the dishes. They were like this big.
Yeah.
But
I want to say the one in my grandma's yard was had to been it was double my wingspan. It was huge.
The job I had with Hughes Aircraft, I was a business manager, and part of my job was we would get the RFP, request for proposal, and we would actually write a proposal to respond to this RFP. And that RFP would have like lots of all the specs that they wanted in their satellite, how they wanted the satellite built. And so I would call a big meeting, and we'd have people from all over the company, send the representatives, and I'd go over this meeting with like 40 or 50 people in it, and we'd talk about everything and how they were going to submit their bids from the different parts of the country, different parts of the company to build this thing. But anyway, when we got the Chinese satellite bid, the RFP, the AppStar bid, they specified 12.5 watt transponders, which probably means nothing to you, but that's really small for a transponder. And also, transponders are relatively cheap for satellite. You don't want to skimp on them. You want to get the best possible transponders you can get to send. If you're sending up to something to space, you want to send the best electronics you can. But normally you'd have like say a 35 or 40 watt transponder would be normal, but they bid 12.5 watt transponders. And I talked this over with my boss and said, well, what's with this? This is like, we have all these other programs, 35, 40 watt, 45 watt, and then here's 12.5 watt. Is that what they want? And it was like a big deal for a while. And we're like, well, that's what they're asking for, so let's just put that in there. It's going to be, save a few $100,000 on transponders, but it's not really, that's kind of silly to have that. And so that's what we submitted in our bid, 12.5 watt transponders. And so this went through a couple of iterations, and it came down to the point where it looked like we were going to win this contract, and they still had the 12.5 watt transponders in the RFP. And so we actually called a meeting, and we had our engineers meet with their engineers and say, listen, you guys don't really want 12.5 watt transponders, because the thing is, if you put like a 40 watt transponder, you'll have a nice 3-foot dish down on the ground, and people can receive the signal with this 3-foot dish. If you put 12.5 watt transponder, you're going to have a dish that's like 15 feet across. That'd be crazy. You're going to have tens of thousands of these dishes throughout the country. And they said, well, we want 15-foot dishes. This is communist China, mind you. We want 15-foot dishes because we want to know who's receiving these signals.
Of course they do.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that is. Well, it's not surprising.
And also, that's so not American. I mean, you would never do that in in the U.S.
Of course not. No, well,
it'd be so inefficient too.
Yeah, no, nobody wants nobody wanted the big dish in their yard. So, well, what else we got?
Well, that's, I think we kind of covered satellites to the extent we can, unless we really dig into the details of how they work and so forth. So that's probably good enough for the high tech and the Heartland today.
Well, I appreciate that. As always, it's fun. And, please, if you got any questions or any topics you'd like Scott to tackle, he'll be the one tackling them. I just sit here and ask the dumb questions.
Okay, well, thanks for having me, Bob.
It's good stuff, man. All right, thanks again for watching this episode of High Tech in the Heartland.